All right, let's dive into this explainer and look at a fascinating geographic puzzle that is literally hiding in plain sight, right in the middle of the American West Coast. You know, when we picture a map of the United States, we tend to make certain assumptions, right? We usually think of the West Coast as this endless, incredibly crowded strip of cities, suburbs, and, well, traffic. But as we're about to see, there is a massive, glaring exception that almost everyone completely overlooks.
I mean, the West Coast is undeniably booming. From the sunny, crowded beaches of San Diego and the sprawling metropolis of LA, up through the tech-heavy San Francisco Bay Area, all the way to the bustling Pacific Northwest hubs like Portland and Seattle. Over 50 million Americans call this coastline home. Think about that for a second. 50 million people. It's absolutely one of the most heavily populated, densely packed regions in the entire country.
But nestled right between those massive tech hubs of California and the rainy, vibrant cities of the Pacific Northwest lies a huge, eerily empty stretch of land across Northern California and Southern Oregon. So why is this massive middle section so utterly empty? Well, the answer doesn't lie in economics, bad luck, or just random chance. It actually comes down entirely to its geography.
Section 1. The Physical Evidence. A Geography of Extremes. To solve this mystery, we really have to start by understanding the rugged and intense landscapes that make up this region, because they form the absolute foundation of this entire situation.
This area boasts an incredibly diverse, deeply cinematic beauty. It's a landscape of intense contrasts. Imagine starting at the coast, looking down sheer, rocky ocean cliffs dropping violently into the Pacific. Then you move inland, and you're swallowed by vast, towering national forests, places like Tahoe, Trinity, and Six Rivers that are home to some of the oldest and tallest trees on Earth. Keep going east, and you hit daunting, looming mountain ranges, the Cascades and the Sierra Nevada. And finally, on the eastern boundary, you cross into the Great Basin, a harsh, dry, high desert landscape that actually has way more in common with rural Nevada than coastal California.
14,179 feet. That's the towering height of Mount Shasta, one of the most prominent mountain peaks in the entire country. It literally juts right out of those massive forests we just talked about, dominating the skyline for hundreds of miles. And to make this landscape even more intense, the U.S. Geological Survey currently monitors Mount Shasta as a very high threat for a volcanic eruption. So, yeah, not exactly prime real estate for a new housing subdivision.
And as we move north into southern Oregon, the extreme geology just continues. Here we find Crater Lake, the deepest lake in the United States. This unbelievable feature formed roughly 7,700 years ago when an entire mountain, Mount Mazama, dramatically collapsed in on itself. It is visually stunning to witness in person, but as you can imagine, an exploded, collapsed volcano doesn't exactly make for easy city planning or a quick morning commute.
So the crucial takeaway here is that this region is undeniably spectacularly beautiful. But that exact beauty, the incredibly deep lakes, the looming volcanoes, the sheer cliffs, and the impossibly dense forests, is exactly what makes establishing large, modern population centers almost completely impossible. The Earth here just wasn't designed to accommodate millions of people.
Section 2. The Alibi. Bypassed by westward expansion. To understand why it's so empty today, we can't just look at a modern map. We have to look back at history and trace how America actually moved across the continent.
Throughout the 1800s, there was a massive, rapid flurry of historical movements pushing Americans west. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 kicked things off. Then you had the Oregon Trail in the 1840s, bringing over 400,000 pioneers across the plains. The California Gold Rush in 1848 exploded San Francisco's population practically overnight. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave away millions of acres. And finally, the Transcontinental Railroad connected the coasts in 1869. But amazingly, every single one of these massive, historic migrations completely leapfrogged our focal region.
So, why did hundreds of thousands of settlers jump right over this vast area? Well, it's because this mountainous middle region was completely missing the pull factors. To the north, ancient floods had washed deep sediment into the Willamette Valley, creating incredibly fertile soil that farmers desperately wanted. To the south, San Francisco offered the unbelievable pull of literal ground, pan, and gold. But the rugged, harsh middle, it had very little pulling people in to brave the wilderness.
Section 3. The Struggle for Infrastructure. Without those initial historical pull factors drawing huge crowds to settle the land early on, building the foundational infrastructure for modern cities later became a monumental struggle.
Most major human settlements begin because they have natural advantages for shipping and trade. If we compare the rivers here, the story really writes itself. Up north, you have the massive navigable Columbia River running right alongside the Willamette Valley. It easily connected Portland to massive global ocean shipping. But down in southern Oregon, you have the much smaller, narrower, and rockier Rogue River. It becomes immediately clear why major, bustling seaports simply couldn't thrive here. The natural waterways just couldn't support massive trade.
And the geographic roadblocks definite don't stop at the rivers. The natural landscape literally blocked human development at every turn. Squeezed tightly between the massive Sierra Nevada and Cascade mountain ranges, there are virtually no low-lying flatlands available to sprawl out and build a proper city grid. Even on the coast, the rugged, rocky beaches prevent the construction of large ocean ports. And all those mountains? They make blasting through to build major highways and railways incredibly difficult and, perhaps more importantly, prohibitively expensive.
Because of these unyielding geographic roadblocks, growth here remained completely anemic compared to the rest of the coast. Today, the largest cities in this entire central region remain relatively small. Eugene, Oregon is the biggest at about 380,000 people. To put that into perspective, Eugene is only about 1/7 the size of the Portland metro area. Following behind are Medford and Chico, hovering in the low 200,000s. They're substantial towns for sure, but nowhere near the megacities to their north and south.
Section 4. The Cultural Consequence, the State of Jefferson. Now, what's really fascinating about this physical isolation is what happens to the people who do live there. The geography didn't just limit the size of the cities, it directly birthed a highly unique cultural and political identity.
Have you ever heard of the State of Jefferson? It's a really interesting political movement, tracing its roots back to the early 1940s. Residents of several of these geographically isolated counties in Northern California and Southern Oregon have long proposed forming an entirely brand new 51st state. They deliberately chose the name Jefferson to champion the third U.S. president's ideals of rural independence, agrarian democracy, and local self-governance.
The movement is so established that they even designed their own flag. And the symbolism on this flag elegantly explains their core grievance. It features a pan for gold in the center, flanked by two distinct X's. Those X's symbolize the deep, lingering feeling of being geographically and politically double-crossed by the distant, densely urban state capitals, Salem in Oregon and Sacramento in California.
We impartially report that modern proponents of the state of Jefferson argue their deeply rural needs are simply incompatible with the policies generated by the millions of people in the heavily populated cities to their north and south. They feel a profound alienation. They argue that because population dictates political power, their lack of adequate representation leads to unfair land use regulations, taxation they fundamentally disagree with, and deep, ongoing conflicts over how their local natural resources, like timber and water, are managed by politicians sitting in offices hundreds of miles away.
Currently, the state of Jefferson remains more of a state of mind than a legally recognized entity, and legally forming it would be no small feat. It would require clearing two massive, constitutionally challenging legislative hurdles. First, getting approval from both the California and Oregon state legislatures to willingly carve up their own maps and surrender territory, and second, gaining approval from the United States Congress. Getting Congress to agree to add a 51st star to the flag is a monumental hurdle on its own. So as we wrap up this explainer on America's strangely empty West Coast, I want to leave you with this to ponder. We've spent this time exploring how extreme geography prevented the rise of massive cities and sprawling infrastructure. But perhaps we're looking at it backwards. Is this lack of population actually a failure of development? Or are the very geographic barriers, the towering volcanoes, the sheer cliffs, the dense ancient forests, the exact features that preserve the unique, highly attractive, independent identity of the region? Perhaps its rugged emptiness is actually its greatest asset. It's definitely something to think about.